Vice President Mike Pence will campaign for Gillespie in Virginia on Saturday. For more on what Republicans want out of this race, we have CBSN political contributor and former communications director for Marco Rubio's presidential campaign, Alex Conant. He joins me from Washington for a GOP Strat Chat. Always good to see you.
Good evening.
All right, Alex, how much attention are Republicans paying to this particular race in Virginia?
Well, it's really the only competitive statewide race happening in the country right now. It's certainly the only competitive statewide race on the ballot in November. And in the past, Virginia has been a bellwether for how the midterms will go. So we're watching it closely in the sense that if Republicans lose badly in Virginia in November next month, that could be a bad omen for next month. And also, on a more personal note, Ed Gillespie is a well-known figure inside the Republican Party. He was a key advisor to George W. Bush. He was former chairman of the RNC, and so he's just well known within the Republican Party and has a lot of fans and supporters around the country. So I think that's another reason why a lot of Republicans are closely watching the race.
So he's got fans and supporters around the country. Establishment types, though, no? Because on Tuesday, the Washington Post reported that Ed Gillespie's former primary opponent, Corey Stewart, was being pressured by people like Steve Bannon and David Bossie to endorse him. Do you think that Stewart's endorsement would help put Gillespie ahead in the polls just a few weeks out from this election? Yeah,
so you're right. He's trailing in the polls. It's narrow. I mean, he's a very winnable race for Ed Gillespie, but these off-year elections, they tend to be campaigns to turn out the base because it's just you see a lot of low propensity voters. They don't turn out. That is to say, turnout's just low. And so you really need to turn out your base. You need to have some enthusiasm on your side. And if you have somebody like your primary opponent refusing to endorse you, obviously that is not helpful. So I think that is why you're seeing pressure. You're trying to gin up some additional enthusiasm amongst conservatives. It's also, for that matter, why you see Barack Obama and Joe Biden going into Virginia, speaking to the liberals and Democrats and trying to get them enthused about this race as well.
Well, there are also reports, Alex, of some conservative activists calling on people like Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell to step down, saying he's not doing enough to pass legislation. What do you think? Is that true?
I mean, I think that's nuts. In a word, I think that is nuts, Elaine.
You do?
I mean, yeah, I mean, look, Mitch McConnell has done nothing this year but try to pass President Trump's agenda. He has a very slim majority. They can only afford to lose 2 or 3 votes, and on some big votes they have. But on President Trump's singular achievement so far, which is a new Supreme Court justice, that is thanks solely to Mitch McConnell's legislative strategy. The fact that you have senators like John McCain and Rand Paul refusing to support the president's repeal and replace Obamacare efforts, that is not Mitch McConnell's fault. That's simply not Mitch McConnell's fault. And for Republicans to go target Mitch McConnell is totally missing the mark, because we need to stay united if we are going to expand our majorities next year.
So what do you think is behind this then? You have the Tea Party patriots coming out with this letter saying, basically blasting McConnell.
Well, look, there is a lot of frustration within the Republican Party. For the first time in a very long time, we control the White House, the House, and the Senate. And there were very high hopes that we would be able to accomplish some huge things, including health care reform, tax reform, infrastructure spending. These are all things that the president promised and expected to get done in the first year, and he hasn't gotten any of them done. So there is understandable frustration amongst conservatives, and you're going to point the finger somewhere. And let's be honest, President Trump himself has been pointing the finger at Senate Republicans. And so it's understandable why the base, or elements of the base, would follow him in blaming Senate Republican leadership. I think that is very misplaced for the reasons I just stated.
Well, what do you think the result is going to be? Do you think this will hurt Republicans when it comes to passing any legislation or winning elections in 2018?
Well, look, it's easier to pass legislation when everyone's getting along and working in the same direction. When there's infighting, a civil war, as some have called it, or just simply a breakdown in trust, as you've seen between President Trump and people like Senator Corker this weekend, that clearly makes it harder to pass very complicated, very controversial legislation like healthcare reform and tax reform. And so it makes an already difficult job more difficult when we have this sort of infighting, and especially when it spills out into public. How this all plays out, I think, is far too early to tell. Clearly, they're going to try to primary some Republicans that are very popular in their states. In the past, those efforts have failed. I expect that they'll fail again next year. But if the Republican Party is divided going into the midterm elections, what should be a pretty good year for us, at least in the Senate, could turn out to be a bad year. And if we lose seats in the Senate, if President Trump comes out of these midterms with smaller majorities than he entered them, that is a political catastrophe for the president and his presidency.
Well, let's talk about some proposed legislation. Here's some of what the president said Wednesday at a rally in Pennsylvania.
We're going to fight, and we're going to get those Republicans and maybe a few of those Democrats to raise their hand, and you're going to have so much money to spend in this wonderful country.
All right, so Alex, what are the chances of the White House convincing all of the Republican senators, even some Democrats, to get on board with its plans for tax reform?
Well, the devil's in the details. So, get back to me, and I'll get back to you in a couple of weeks on that. Look, I think every single Republican, all 52 of them in the Senate, want to pass tax reform. And this is something that they've wanted to do for years. And we haven't had major tax reform in a generation in this country. So clearly it's something that they want to do. There's very good policy reasons. It's a core tenet of conservatism that if we can make the tax code simpler and more fair, lower the rates for everyone, that is good policy, is what we want to do. But as I just said, the problems are in the details. How much is this going to increase the deficit? Who are we going to increase taxes on, if anybody? And once you answer those questions, you start to lose votes very quickly. And you really can't afford to lose more than 1 or 2 votes before you have a big problem on your hands. Never mind trying to attract Democrats to supporting what inevitably will be a controversial tax bill. So I think skepticism abounds, but there is optimism simply because Republicans feel they want to do this, and they feel real political pressure to do it. I think speeches like the president gave tonight will only help in terms of applying additional pressure and recognizing that this is a very difficult task that requires presidential leadership if it's going to happen.
All right, like you said, the devil's in the details. Alex Conant,
Exactly.
By the way, good luck to your Washington Nationals as they take on my Cubbies on Thursday.
Thank you. It's a big night here in D.C. tomorrow.
All right, Alex, take care.